Hello and welcome to another special episode of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. Once again, we are diving into, I guess, our Earth Alliance Geneva University courses curriculum, which is becoming kind of a thing. We've taken a look at the league, and we're still talking about constantly the league as a whole, but with a massive asterisk that every part of the league is completely different from the rest. So we probably should start talking about the individual parts of the league a little bit. There's a lot of different league species, up to 14 that we can talk about in any capacity. Let's start with one, and let's start maybe with the most famous and the one that has the biggest capacity of getting to the level of a great power, of leaving the League of Non-Aligned Worlds behind. Before we get there, I have one nice transition picture that I just needed to show you because I love it so much. As an example of the beautiful illustrative art that is in this rulebook. It's a farming Narn, and I love him. It's beautiful. This is what Narn is supposed to look like before it gets bombarded. Um, but it also hints at the topic that, of course, we want to talk about these species beyond their function as politicians on Babylon 5. We want to talk about the everyday life. Like the everyday Narn is not Jakar, the everyday Narn is probably much closer to this.
Yes, I understand why you love this. Though I'm a bit off with the depiction of the animals. I think they could have made something a bit more exotic.
So my headcanon for this is that this is a painting that somebody on Earth makes based on the description of the Narn homeworld. And the universal translator just tells them, well, they use oxen for their fields, not because they literally have Terran oxen, but because they have the equivalent animal to that. And, why tell you the Narn name? It's gonna be something like that. I don't know, it's such an out of place Narn, but then you have to remember, these are supposed to be functional species, right? So, yeah, there would be a lot of farming involved for all of them. It doesn't matter how warlike your species is, even Klingons need to eat, so they're gonna have some more basic necessities met. But let's move over to the Drazi, who also got a very nice little portrait there. And just as a reminder, our questions, what have we seen? What do we imagine? What is written about them? And I've collected a handful of sort of questions that I want to pose to you of the general things about this species that we might think about. Of course, feel free to talk about any aspect of the species that you're fascinated with if I haven't covered it as part of this little questionnaire thing. But yeah, for me, the six defining question were, what does it mean to be a Drazi? What are they all about? Then what shaped them? This is kind of, what kind of history do you imagine for them to get to this point? What is everyday life like? What do they believe in? How are they ruled? How does the government kind of work? And finally, because it is Babylon 5 after all, what do they want? Mr. Morden's question has to be in there as well. So feel free to pick and choose if you want to talk about something else entirely, some of these questions. Give me your impressions of this wonderful species.
Of course, the most iconic thing so far is the green and purple, which I have to admit I'm not remembering that clearly. I just remember they have every year or every few years this kind of battle between purple and green to determine who is ruling.
Yes.
I'm sure there was a bit more information, but I don't get it together.
There wasn't much more information. They have this regular fighting. It's a very old rule that was established. It is so old that it doesn't take into account alien species. So theoretically, there's nothing keeping a human from taking the leadership's role as part of that conflict. It is supposed to be not necessarily non-violent, but at least non-lethal. But it has been known to escalate beyond that point as well. And that's broadly all we learn about that.
Yeah, it feels a bit like a version of the Olympics created for government determination. And yeah, but also, like you really said, it's really old. Maybe they don't even remember why this is happening. Though I could imagine that it was initially started in a smaller group of fewer people living together, and that this kind of developed there, and while they were growing and building larger villages, cities, and yeah, more people coming together, that kind of state. Otherwise, I can't really imagine why this would be still a way to choose your next government. Because yeah, it's not about qualities, it's not about an outlook of future, it's just to a certain degree raw violence escalating, and yes, kind of survival of the fittest. And even though we have not that much interaction with the Drazi so far, I don't think they are this kind of stupid, I would call it, to think that just a strong one can be their leader. Except there's a religious reason for this, but then I'm completely out of this because yeah, it's religion.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about religion because you love this topic so much. One of the other pieces that we know is they were visited by the Warlords because they also have the angel figure, and I believe Drashala is the name that they have for it, which we see at the very finale of season 2. They were also one of the first species to send a warship when the immortality serum was being developed back in season 1. So they are quick on the draw when it comes to this. And they usually get, when they get speaking roles, the sort of broken, very simple language English that you would usually. It doesn't make them sound particularly eloquent, let's say, to put this as nicely as possible. On the other hand, I would agree with you, they can't be just fundamentally stupid. I mean, they do build interstellar spaceships relatively easily, so they are a functional society at the end of it. I will use this opportunity because I don't think we did this when we were talking a very long time about green and purple in that episode. I will say, if I put myself in the shoes of a Drazi and I would have to argue for this system of government, I would say whenever you try to establish some sort of, semi-democratic government system where you pick a leader from a large group of people, essentially what you're doing is try and find a good criteria to choose people from. Now, ideally, you want that to be kind of meritocracy. You want the people that are best skilled and, wisest and best suited to a role to get into this role. But like, in how many government systems is this really the case? Isn't it true that, it's either people who have a particular amount of money or who have particularly good connections or the correct bloodline or this is what is most often talked about in our real world news. It's usually people who are the best at swaying a lot of people, which is how you get populist leaders, but that doesn't really equate to being skilled in terms of policy. So if I look at all of this, as a Drazi, I could at least say, well, what you're saying you want, skilled leaders, is not what you're getting out of your systems. My system also doesn't give me that, but at least it's not as corrupt. At least, the guy that says he's the best at beating up everybody else probably is right, otherwise a bigger guy would come and beat him up as well.
Yeah, on being a stable way of choosing, I would agree. Still, I don't get the benefit of it. Like, yeah, okay, congratulations, you can beat someone down. I mean, if this is in the direction of when this originally was initiated as the way of choosing the leader, maybe it was relevant because, I don't know, someone attacked them or some really scary, dangerous sort of animal that had to be shooed away, like the real version of a Drazi dragon. Um,
I mean, what I would say is of course, the shiny bit of this entire system is the fighting that is going on. You know, this is why we keep talking about who is the strongest. But I think the less silly way of looking at that, and the way where maybe we actually find some real life examples of a system like this, is that there is just a very high degree of randomness in there. Who gets to be green and who gets to be purple is assigned at random. And who wins this fight in this muddly mess usually is probably also going to be down more to luck than anything else. Like, sure, if you're a big buff guy, you're gonna maybe stand a better chance, but at the end of the day, fistfights are notoriously volatile. So there's definitely also going to be a level of luck in there. And I think this is something that some societies and some, experiments of democracy have dabbled in, this idea. Okay, what if we just make it a lottery? What if, being a politician isn't really a career that you can prepare for or anything like that? What if it's just something that you get called for at random and, we hope at least not the corrupt people get in there? This isn't something that we've ever gone with on a big scale, probably because it doesn't work so well, but I think if I was a Drazi and trying to convince somebody that we're not some primitive brutes, that would kind of be the argument that I'm trying to make.
mm, I have to think a bit of the. Please don't punch me, audio lockers, for saying this. A bit like the when I'm missing words. I'm sorry. I'm tired.
I put it together so that sounds
If you have to go in front of a judge, you have this randomly elected. Please.
Jury duty.
Jury duty, exactly. At least if you look at it from a movie or a series, it's like, yeah, we have this group of random people that are just chosen randomly based on nothing, and just because they are living there, and have to decide is this person guilty or not. I don't know what is going on there in the background, but I do hope that there is more than what I just knows. Never really cared to look properly at this, but it's kind of the same idea, I would presume, that you were stating.
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea you want to get judged by your peers, and that is not saying, oh, we don't have any lawyers in our society and law doesn't matter. No, of course, there is a judge and there's going to be lawyers and there's a procedure about this that lays out the case and goes through the motion. But then at the end of the day, there's sort of this moral judgment that has to be made, that people say, everybody is qualified to do that. Everybody is, as self-determined citizen of this nation, is able to, when the facts are laid out before them, make a judgment call on that. And I mean, to some degree, this is true for government institutions in any sort of democracy as well, right? Like, yes, we are electing representatives and such, but that doesn't mean that the entire government is that. If, you look at the Netherlands, who doesn't manage to, properly form a government for months on end, it doesn't mean that the state collapses. All the bureaucracy, all the ministries and stuff still continue to function because there's thousands and thousands of people working in there that are not affected by the election directly, that are appointed before or after. And I mean, this is how I imagine Drazi society also works. It can't literally be that every cycle, every Drazi just leaves their job, goes punch each other, and then goes back to a different job. Like, obviously they will have this government structure that remains unchanged, and then, the representatives are being decided that kind of push things in a direction. Otherwise, if we take it as simple as presented in the episode, it's just not going to be functional society, which it obviously is supposed to be. So no, I think that despite the batshit crazy premise, if you unpack it a little bit, it's not that different from some things that we humans also come up with in this effort of trying to develop a system that is, as fair and uncorruptible as possible. And, if you break it down into a very simplistic description, it still sounds very silly. If you condense everything far enough down, it'll become simplistic and nonsensical because you're just lacking too much context. Which I guess is in part a bit of a challenge that our fact book faces here, right? Because you have all of these species that are getting, a handful of scenes and then this defines them. And there's obviously like a certain danger in that. If you, only meet a human that is currently celebrating Christmas and then you are asked to depict what human civilization looks like, that's gonna be a very different picture from what humanity is actually like. So we have to keep in mind also that, there's probably a lot of more to Drazi than just this little tidbit that we got here. But on this basis, let's see what the fact books and such make of them. Let's go with these and let's see how they fit your impression of the Drazi that we've gotten so far. It has been said that of all races, the Drazi are the most reliable. They can be relied on to be violent, they can be relied on to be blunt, and relied on to follow the edicts of centuries-old traditions and laws to a T. This is the whole green and purple thing, basically, in a nutshell. And the other quote that I just found, somewhat poetic as far as science fiction rulebooks go. When they have a problem, the Drazi tend to solve it with an Occam's razor the size of a starship. Which, also goes in this, very blunt, very simple instruments on a large enough scale. In connection to, megastructures and such being a thing, one of my favorite quotes for science fiction world building and civilizations in general was coined by Isaac Arthur, saying, if brute force doesn't solve your problem, you're probably just not using enough of it, kind of referring to this idea on a big enough scale you can make anything work. And I think this is something that the Drazi live up to. So what do you say is an apt description of the Drazi that you've seen so far?
I would say it's quite fitting. At least it matches what we have seen so far. How this translates, of course, to other situations, we'll have to see.
And I think we can keep this always with the caveat that, at the back of our mind, it's supposed to be still a functioning civilization. Like, yes, they are violent, and I can totally see how you would characterize an entire culture as that. That doesn't mean that they start killing each other at every opportunity. They still, need to stay alive somehow. But that they have this very confrontational way of dealing with things, I can easily see that. The big question is, of course, how do they get to this point? Do you have any sort of general idea, like what sort of history might lead a civilization to this point?
Mm.
There already was like this hint of religious reasons maybe that you were talking about.
Yeah, just go for it. I don't want to think about the religious part.
I think you're going to be happy about some parts of this and very unhappy about other parts of this. But let's take it from the top. The one quote that I have here, which is attributed to Delenn, although I should very much quote this, is an author of rulebooks putting words into the mouth of Delenn. So you be the judge if this is something that she would say. But this quote is saying, the Drazi came into space the way a wild gog comes into into a cage full of Temshi. They spend a few seconds admiring the beauty around them, and then the rest of the time making a terrible mess. Fits my impression so far fairly well. If we go further back in history, and there is a very detailed history written for them, but essentially it starts all out with this idea that they have this planet, and they live on it, and they evolve rather peacefully up to a certain point where their populations are distributed far enough that they get cut off from one another. And for a long time, because of geographical and from isolation and climate changes, two distinct bands of Drazi developed, two distinct strains. This is, I think, an interesting idea because it's something that in human history never really happened like that. But you could easily imagine how it would. Like if the Bering Strait were positioned a little bit differently, you can easily imagine how very early on, Neanderthals and modern humans get separated entirely, and then for 100,000 years are completely isolated from one another. So as a concept, I find that kind of interesting. Would you like to take a guess of what these distinct bands of Drazi were?
Yeah, of course, we have what we've seen in the series so far, the green and the purple. Drazi, which probably comes from their like group sigil, what they established as their marking in one way or another, if it's about like wearing this scarf or anything like that. And that's probably how the first fight for ruleship started, that in one way they started to connect and then had to decide who is on top.
Now, I have to give you a little bit more context here, because that might change your perception a little bit. Now, I will have to say, the rulebook and its author here take a very big swing by establishing some very broad things out of thin air, but I like the concept quite a lot. And the core idea is green and purple initially was the Drazi equivalent of skin colors. This was not a sigil or sort of a banner that they ever decided on. This was literally like evolutionary, two different strands of Drazi that had these different colors. The green ones are surviving. We know the green is much more grayish, so it was probably not as cartoonish as it first sounds, but different hues of coloring that they had. And I find this really fascinating because in the episode, the Drazi talk about green and purple is essentially meaningless. This isn't like, the flags that you other people use with all their ideologies. It's pointless. It's at the end of the day just random. And if this was initially like two empires with different flags, that would be kind of odd, because then it would have this political connotation. But if it's literally just, no, these represent skin color that randomly at some point existed. Okay, now I see why this is such an important deal to you, that it's assigned at random. The other bit about this that recontextualizes this, I noted here, the purple Drazi, the real purple Drazi, are actually extinct. This was like over thousands of years, this conflict between these two, the different tribes that were fighting each other, and this is at a time where they're relatively primitive still, and eventually the green Drazi develop, proper metals and develop weapons with metals and just go absolutely ham, to the point that the purple Drazi are now extinct. And to their credit, unlike the Centauri, they don't have a big feast where they celebrate this victory, like the Centauri over the Zor. No, the Drazi actually had the moment of introspection and said, this was really bad what we did there. And this is why green and purple is still utilized, because they sort of developed the system to make sure that this kind of deadly conflict doesn't occur anymore, and to sort of, keep the purple Drazi around, even if just symbolically. And the idea that this is such an ancient tradition that goes like to the very onset of their civilization is kind of an interesting hat to put on them, I think.
Yes, because it makes them so much more developed and reflected. I mean, you already said, the Centauri would have a feast there, and it makes the Drazi far more sympathetic, because they got to the point of realizing, that was deep shit we did there, and trying to keep this alive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if and how much. I mean, we don't get this information in the series, but the idea that at least a few still know why this is happening would be nice to see.
And I mean, this is one of those things where we don't get to see this in the show. I could very easily understand why this wouldn't be a backstory the Drazi are keen on sharing, though. Like, this seems like it would be a very sensitive subject. And I just as far as writing this culture goes, I think it's kind of interesting, because it takes into account not just this idea that the Drazi are the funny aliens that like to punch each other a lot, but the other aspect that we learn about them in episode is that they are really sticklers for rules, even if those rules go completely against their own interest. The Drazi probably really didn't want Ivanova to take charge and break the entire election system on the station, but they let her do it because these rules are apparently really, really, really important, even if they don't take into account other species. Which to me indicates that it's probably a case that many of them still know why these rules are there. Otherwise, why would they follow them so strictly?
Yes.
So that idea I kind of like. And this idea is developed further a little bit. If we go to the next question over here, let me just pull up the next slide. Oh, okay. We will come back to this point. I will have to come at you with some religion in the meantime, though. It's very unfortunate. So, I mean, one of the things I do like is the fundamentally the violence and the fighting that the Drazi have is not religiously motivated initially. It's just a difference in evolution that happened to coincide with a lot of fighting in between the different strains that came from that. They reflected on that, built a culture around that. Fine. Gods have nothing to do with this. Gods do come into equation much, much later when the Drazi developed their space program. And this is notable, the Drazi actually developed their space program on their own. If you look at the map back in the very beginning, the Drazi freehold, the space they control is relatively big. They're not as small as most of the other species there. And I think one possible explanation for this might be a lot of the other species got colonized by the Centauri relatively early on, and then developed spaceflight on the basis of Centauri technology and shit like that. The Drazi have a backstory much more similar to us humans, where they develop on their own relatively far before making any contact, so they get onto the galactic stage as a relatively big player. A parallel that I quite like. But whereas humanity, we covered this in Earth Alliance history, had this very, privatized capitalist space colonization going on, where there was like individual nations and corporations and stuff doing that. In the case of the Drazi, it was this thing. The Drazi are very, very conflict-oriented. So usually it took a fairly strong religious tendency to unite them. And the Drazi have many, many, many of these. There's like not one unifying faith for them. There's many different religious movements they had. And usually in the beginning, big religious movements were the ones that created enough cohesion to go out into space and colonize. But then, as it says in this quote, 30 years after reaching the heavens, the Drazi brought holy war to them. The unfortunate side effect, if you have a bunch of religious extremists in space, was that you very soon had religious fighting in space. So, make of that what you will. But moving forward towards the direction, what is everyday life like? And this is difficult to answer. I went with my own gut on this decision and brought you a quote when it comes to food things and such. Because of their hunter ancestry and preference for live or at least raw foods, they have few dietary items in Drazi culture. So there's very much this idea they don't spend much time preparing their food. They hunt it and then they eat it. And I think, we just recorded the gala, and one of the practical effects we really liked was the food crawling away in its plate from an alien trying to eat it. I think this is one of the things the Drazi would rather enjoy. They like food that is lively still.
Yeah, I can see this. I don't know if it was except for Babylon 5, I'm not sure where I've seen this, but I roughly remember that there was one series where it was a problem that there were two species near each other because they were like, "Ee, look how they're eating. It's disgusting. These barbaric creatures," stuff like that. And yeah, one of the things was that these were like eating kind of their food raw, or like yeah, a still wiggling fish or something like that.
I mean, it's such a common thing in Babylon 5. We already had it mentioned that between the Centauri and Narn, there's a similar feud whether Spoo should be served fresh or not, and suggesting to a Centauri that there's some quite fresh Spoo on the plate is deeply insulting. So I think this idea that culinary preferences are a big indicator of culture, I like that a lot. Um, I can tell you, and this is the tiniest possible bit of spoiler, we will learn more about the Drazi in the rest of this show. We might even get to see their homeworld at some point. So we will learn more about their everyday life. But one of the things I really enjoyed in the descriptions in the rulebooks and such is that, for one, the Drazi homeworld is a popular tourist location, actually, because it does have a long, rich history, one that hasn't been completely obliterated by the Centauri, by the way. A lot of temples, even though to most visitors it doesn't look like the Drazi are praying a whole lot. It's usually more like fighting rings in there, but, to each their own. But apparently, like a vibrant culture over there that is actually quite inviting to other species. The Drazi aren't super isolationist when it comes to that. And I think this might go back to this idea that, yes, there are a lot about fighting, but also a lot of very strict rules about fighting. And most of those probably don't incorporate punching aliens a whole lot. So you're probably quite safe if you're running around the streets of the Drazi homeworld, even though they have this reputation for being quite blunt.
Yeah, there kicks in my commentary with the Olympics. You have as long as you have rules, you can consider most things some sort of sport.
Yes. And
And I don't mean this in a mean way. Before someone jumps at this.
before a triathlete feels like he's being compared to some barbaric aliens over here. The last thing, and I didn't think of this before, and so I didn't include a picture of this, but I do like that if we see the Drazi if we see military Drazi, they don't sort of have the Klingon phenomenon of looking kind of like cavemen in leather jackets, where it's all this like very space barbarian style. They have like big shoulder pauldrons, a lot of gold and red livery that almost looks like a little bit more Napoleonic, similar to the Centauri. So there is very much this idea that they're probably avid duelists more than brawlers in that way outside of the election process. Let's move on a little bit from everyday life to their faith. We already mentioned this, that they have boatloads of gods and goddesses, but they are not they're not a theocratic civilization in any way, shape, or form. Which even goes to this point, they saw Droshala in the gardens, but out of 10 Drazi, there's probably 2 Drazi that are really impressed with that, and the rest doesn't really care because they have completely different beliefs that other ones probably haven't touched. The one thing we definitely should talk about a little bit is how the Drazi are ruled, because there is actually a little bit of nuance to this. I already mentioned that I'm very much convinced that even the government of the Drazi is probably mostly, bureaucracy that is untouched by this entire shenanigans. But the quote goes a little bit further. The Drazi only have 3 organizations of serious note: their government, their military, and the That Vorak, which is sort of a council of the elders. And that introduces a facet of their society that I personally really like, and it's this idea that the Drazi actually get really, really old. And they have this existential crisis looming always, where for Drazi physical prowess is very important. And, with the way the election process works, once you're old and frail, getting into power is kind of difficult. And this is where you would switch from the government into the Thath Vorak, which is sort of this council of elders. It's not officially a government position, it's not officially a military position, but in both aspects, they dabble a lot and sort of, nag the others until they listen to them. And I like this once again as like a little extra element of reflection where, yes, they have this entire government system that is based on physical strength and such, but they do understand that having old people around that have wisdom to offer is also a good idea.
At least in theory.
I mean,
I mean, this whole wisdom of age thing is something
theoretical.
nice and good to have and to get an insight. Yeah, you just don't get while working on it. But on the other hand, of course, it's not a given just because you're old, you do not have wisdom. Therefore, it's this idealistic idea. But I like it. I like it.
I mean, what I will say is, effectively not every old Drazi can be in a big position of this Elder Council. So within this Elder Council will be some sort of system of who gets more say than the others. And I will be optimistic and say it's probably not just another big brawl just among older people to make it fair. Maybe there's something more merit-based in there. But just this idea that outside of the thing that we see in the show, there are other elements to Drazi society that exist. I kind of like that idea. And once again, this reverence for the elders, for their own history, for the rules that they have established and such, puts a lot of order into this civilization, which otherwise might seem very chaotic.
Yes, I really like this aspect because it's, again, just more than what we've seen or what was presented so far, and certainly elevates from this brute group of, at least seeming idiots to a far larger scale.
And I think that's important because with these smaller civilizations, I mean, the Narn look initially like the big, brawly space warriors, and then we get a lot of nuance to that throughout the show, which is easy because we have a main character of them. With the Drazi, it's Charter. So obviously, a lot of what we are putting into them here is sort of outside of what the show actually depicts. But I still, once again, in the spirit of Babylon 5, all of this fits for me really well because it goes in a similar direction of adding nuance and extra dimensions to them. And it leads us to the final and probably most important question, because as always, we are endlessly interested in your own thoughts moving forward. And that is, what do the Drazi want? And feel free to be creative with this. Obviously, right now, they probably want the Centauri to stop bombarding their worlds, granted.
Yes.
Beyond that point, I'm just curious, what could you imagine just story-wise, how might the Drazi play into this show in the future?
Considering the first episode of our third season, we have this Drazi helping escape a ranger, and we have this let's call it ranger camp on one of their planets. I would say they're sort of in with the idea of having like a stable structure. I mean, we already said now that they are, even though they like fighting, they have rules and they stick to these rules. So I could imagine that they maybe would like to have like a strict structure a lot of people are following to interact on, and of course also to fall back on. Otherwise it's quite tough to think in these large scales, because what as an entire species, what or even if you try to reduce it, what does the nation want? What does like a city want? I mean, this is really complicated to think about, because most of the times it's not that clear. I will try again. I mean, how many could answer this question for themselves? What do I want?
Where do you see yourself in 5?
Yeah, this idiotic question. I really hate this, because life is changing. It's not static. It's a river. So yeah, what usually what if you think about this pyramid of needs, for us humans, it would be we like to have food, water. We have like to have it warm or not too hot. We like to have security or a sense of security, and so on until you go on the personal development level. The problem is that also there's a lot of information missing. So how the Drazi are constructed, what does their pyramid needs look like? Therefore, this whole um structure thing is kind of the only thing I can imagine right now.
Okay. I mean, one thing I really like is that you make this reference to them having a ranger base, because I think, like, now having talked through them a little bit, this makes a whole lot of sense. But then just having watched the first 2 seasons, if I was being asked, like, where is our, basis for the Rangers, our Army of Light, the Drazi wouldn't have been the first candidate I come up with. But then, like, looking back on them, okay, with the extended in content that we have now, they're one of the first species we know of that has really definitively said genocide is a bad thing. They are all about rules. They are trying to, establish a lot of fighting without being lethal. It makes a lot of sense that the idea of the Rangers would be really exciting to them, because it's like, wow, we get to fight a whole lot and it's for a good cause. That's the best of all worlds. It's great. And they have this whole, like, brooch with 2 different figures on it. That's almost like green and purple, so that's perfect. We can totally work with this.
And of course, if you think about this whole, we learned our lesson about the genocide. Inviting in others would also be the next level. It's not just like, okay, this is what we did is bad. The next level is, okay, we will prevent that and try to be open to others.
And I think for me, this is a little bit the direction that I would imagine. What do the Drazi want? Of all the species, I can tell you this: of all the species in the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, the Drazi, I think, are the closest to becoming a great power themselves. I think if they really, really wanted to, they might. I could imagine that they could pressure the Babylon 5 Council to give them their own vote. So I like to believe the ambition of the Drazi might either be to do exactly that, to transcend the League of Non-Alliance Worlds, or if we are being really optimistic with them and go like, well, they've already started having Rangers with them, so maybe they are actually much more motivated for cooperation than we thought. Maybe even something like saying, hey, we would like to become leaders of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, not in the sense of subjugating all of them, but actually, fostering cooperation and making using the potential of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds in a more effective way. And as crazy as it sounds to go to the green and purple guys for leadership, they are very good at establishing rules that hold for thousands and thousands of years. So if somebody could figure out a system for the League of Non-Aligned Worlds to function, the Drazi were able to build a functioning government for a people that is all about infighting. So maybe they're actually the perfect guys to ask for this. They seem certainly more qualified than the Membari. The Membari come around as these space elves, but then I look at the Grey Council and I say, well, suddenly the whole government system of green and purple doesn't sound so crazy anymore by comparison. So who knows? Maybe that's it. Any final thoughts you have on the Drazi? Otherwise, feel free to start us off with an outro.
Yeah, with that, we hope you enjoyed our new installment on this channel. Get a few new ideas, or maybe we just deconstructed everything you thought and believed in. Feel free to let us know about that. Where can people find us?
Basically on all the usual social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, /X, and of course on Spotify and all the different places you can get your podcasts.
But here on YouTube, we are what again?
Probably the happiest.
Because you can see us. And with this, we hope to see you next time.
Beautiful. Very nice.